Well, I'd like to welcome you to the video on changes occurring in the American school. In this video, we're going to look at 5 different types of changes occurring in our schools with the organizational structure, the curriculum, some general practices, and instructional techniques, and assessment, and give you an idea of all the different things happening in our various schools. You know, the desire to change has always been part of the human condition, and schools are no different. So in this module section, we're going to ask you to write about what educational change in the American school holds the most promise. So it could be any of these or something of your own choosings, but this will give you a very broad, quick view of some of those changes. Change always is difficult for people. Even though it's part of our condition, change is hard. For example, I would almost challenge you to try to write a couple of sentences by changing hands. If you're left-handed, try right, or vice versa. Or whenever you take your next shower, try not to follow the same pattern, which we find people do most every time. If you go from head down, try from feet up this next time as you wash. So see if it's hard to change. But change is usually hard. And I go by the baby philosophy because really the only people that constantly cry when they need change is a baby. They can't communicate verbally, so usually they just cry if their diaper is full or wet. So I take the baby philosophy when it comes to change. If it stinks, change it. And so in school systems, a lot of times that applies because the amount of change is sometimes directly proportional to the amount of stink. If things just aren't working well, then there's a big push for radical change. So, and a lot of times when there's great stink and you have a major blowout, sometimes boards of education, when they're washing that baby, they sometimes get an inkling to throw out the baby with the bath water. So let's look at some of these things changing the way we do things in our system. And again, I want you to look, as we talk about these things, at what change you believe holds the most promise. So let's start with organization. We've seen in the past couple of decades a move in many elementary schools to move from multi-age grouping patterns where you put kids K through 12 or K and 1 together, grades 2 and 3 and 4 and 5, and it's looking more at outcomes-based education here in the sense that in a K1 it may be for some children take you 3 years to go through that those 2 grade levels based on outcomes, or it could take you 1. So instead of basing on age, you base on outcomes, and there's multiple age children in different groupings. Or we've seen a K3 ungraded school system. That is, you stay in a group till your 3rd grade curriculum, and when you've mastered that, then you go on. Another interesting organizational change is looping. And looping is where you have teachers follow children, as we find sometimes in some schools you have a large percentage of single-parent families, and so it's a good, at least they claim, a good idea to have one teacher follow their kids for quite some time. Many times it's just for 2 years, sometimes more, but teachers kind of loop with their children. They know them a little bit better over a longer period of time, and it offers consistency for the child with a leadership figure as they develop. In middle school especially, we've seen teaming. We're starting to see that also in the high school and elementaries, where you have kids in groups large groups usually, with teachers assigned to them, and In the middle schools especially, there's a planning time just for teachers, and they will have an individual planning time as well as a team planning time, and it offers sort of a solid way to have a group of teachers and adults working with kids in all the disciplines. We also see individual planning for each child, a lot of times in these teams. In the organization of many of the high schools, we've seen, and especially the larger schools, a school within a school. In fact, in some schools, you may have 3,000 students, and you may have 3 wings perhaps, and each of the wings are separate schools within themselves that have their own separate names and the like, with smaller numbers, but each with principal and a counselor and the like. And so great for intramurals, especially. You have those 3 school within the schools compete against one another. And also it builds a smaller class size and school. Block scheduling has been around for quite some time, and many schools have tried that, and some have gone back to a modified version of a regular schedule and block scheduling. Blocking is when you have a class taught for a 90-minute session, maybe on Monday and Wednesday, and perhaps on Friday. Then you have the normal regular schedule. But blocking has had its ups and downs in the research. So we see a lot of schools forming business partnerships with the local businesses that come in sometimes to supply things, to supply people. We've seen it also in the woods and industrial shop areas, where you have local businesses, construction businesses that want to sort of develop and make sure kids graduating from the high school well trained in a certain type of skill. So business partnerships also were around to provide rewards and external backups and rewards for kids as they graduate. The Renaissance program is typical of that, where based on how you did that semester, there are certain rewards given to kids. Differentiated diplomas have been around for quite some time, where certain classes are worth more than others and they're weighted, and so you have a differentiated diploma, and according to what class you've been taking, you have different diplomas. We see in many alternative schools, especially individual learning plans. We've always seen it in when a child is identified in special ed programs, but now we're seeing more of a movement into schools having a individual learning plan for every child as they go through the system. In schools also, we see student advocates provided for every child that sort of follows them all 4 years. Used to sometimes be called the homeroom instructor, but we see a consistency in the advocate staying with that child all through his career. In some of the private schools especially, you're seeing a Carnegie unit replacement, where instead of just taking English, Spanish, and the like, you're taking kind of groups of classes, and letter grading it's pretty well done away with, and they're going to mastery of concepts. So interesting look at how we're changing the part of the structure and the curriculum of the school. And then lastly, college scholarships being given automatically to kids with certain GPAs. Sometimes in 1 or 2 states that has been a state initiative with taxpayer money, and in other places it's been by the local school support group that has a number of fundraisers and gives kids scholarships as they go to after high school graduation functions or colleges. Also, we've seen we've seen in the course the alternative schools have been big. and developing in all throughout America. We have separated learning environments that are away from the high school that many times have accelerated curriculums. They meet sometimes at non-traditional times, and typically they fall into three types of alternative schools, which are educational or reform or therapeutic. So if you want to read more about that, we've listed some websites you can go to, and we'll be looking much more at alternative schools as we go through the rest of the class. Magnet schools were established usually an outshoot of the busing issue to attract kids to certain curriculums throughout the larger school districts. You might have a fine arts high school, a military high school, a science high school, where kids can go to any high school they choose based on their interests. So magnet schools have been around for quite some time, but a good way of looking at a different structure. Homeschools have taken a gigantic increase in students over the past 20 years. They're very organized elementary through 12th grade curriculums now that parents can use. They can buy the hard print, it can be online, but there are complete resources now and textbooks for homeschooling. There are testing systems that are aligned with the state's curriculum, so kids can show that they've earned credit for certain classes by passing those tests, and they have even local field trips and theme classes that many times homeschool parents combine their resources to fashion in communities. Many homeschools associations will foster regional, state, and national events, and they even have their own organized athletic programs in your bigger city. So homeschooling is much different than it was 30 years ago. Very well organized, and some of the research says that many of the kids that are pulled out of the public schools are those that were high achieving kids being homeschooled at home. We see, as we mentioned, satellite learning centers. Usually many of these are established by the educational resource centers in various states that have, like economics with Just Imagine City. You have a mobile space station at Greenbush in southeast Kansas. They even have their own rainforest. So, and they have buses that will travel, that will provide certain sort of curriculum that really couldn't be taught with the things needed by that local school district. So satellite learning centers have seen a jump in many of the rural areas especially. Charter schools we're going to have a whole module on, but these are schools that are unencumbered by state statutes. They do have to have certain characteristics, such as being measured by test scores, but they're focused on innovation, and they can sidestep some of the state statutes if they show a good reason for doing that. But charter schools are prevalent in all the states in America. We see private schools also being formed, and some closing. It's rather controversial. The Padilla schools, the Edison schools, were for-profit schools, and again, each of these were highly innovative as they began, and offered some very neat perspectives. However, as we saw the research and their development, sometimes some of them didn't do well, while others have. But private schools, for-profit private schools, are another organizational change in the American school. We see communities moving themselves into the schools, especially in urban areas. The CIS is a national network of offices that connect community resources and social services for kids so they can stay in school. In fact, some of the schools sometimes will try to locate the community services in the school itself. We all know that distance learning schools have become very prevalent, where we can have degrees earned over the internet without ever having to leave your home and attend a site-based class. We have that in high schools as well as college. Also in the organizational structures, we have new preschool programs propping up in different ways. We have vertical teams of teachers and administrators, college personnel, community leaders, social workers, all working together as a team, coming together to help schools as they try to reorganize. We've seen year-round schools, especially on the West Coast, where you go to school all year long. You might have a 45-day period of instruction with 15 days of vacation, and you have 4 of those, I think, as they go through, or maybe 3. Or you have a 60-20 match where you where you have 5 quarters with a choice of 4 going to 4 of the 5 quarters of a school year. So year-round schools, different way of looking at spending time with your kids rather than the old model where we have our summers free. So where it used to be, the kids would work the crops for their parents. The choice of schools, school choice, has been a strong reform movement, especially from parents, where parents are given vouchers, which is money for those students wanting to go to a private school. The voucher could be used to pull them out of the public school and then to be used in a private school. And in Kansas especially, where we have 292 school districts, a consolidation of schools, reform movement to cut costs by making our districts bigger so that, well, basically you can save money. So in the organizational structure, I think to end up, Saturday schools have been a way of kind of getting kids to master the curriculum. If they didn't pass a test or they didn't get something done that week, instead of giving them an F, they will come back and get their work done on Saturday. So Saturday schools were popular, especially in the early 2000s. We've seen now different types of tutoring systems come to play, but Saturday schools were once very popular. Beginning teacher induction programs have, over the past 20 years, become tremendously important to ease the transitions for first-year teachers into their role. Many good programs follow and have a mentor for that beginning teacher for 3 years, and there's a focus each year on constantly meeting all year long with specific duties of the mentor all 3 years. We found in the research that one of the single determining factors of whether or not a teacher stayed in the profession was whether or not they had a strong mentor. Typically, the research has shown in the early 1900s that we lost almost 50% of our teachers in the first 3 years of teaching. And now those statistics are getting a heck of a lot better of our teachers staying in the school systems. Well, those were all organizational structures. So let's look at the curriculum. What educational changes in the American school hold the most promise? Keep that in the back of your head. But now let's look at maybe it could be in the area of curriculum, of what is taught. You know, we've seen a big focus change between filling kids' heads with knowledge to critical thinking and problem solving, a bigger look towards multiculturalism and more equity in which kids are exposed to curriculums. In fact, some in the more liberal area will say that all kids could take the gifted curriculum if we structured it right. We've seen a move in in curriculum to computerize the curriculum so that the lesson plans are already done, or you have a choice of lesson plans so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. But there is a focus on what is taught over the past 25 years. Curriculum integration has come into play where we map the curriculum. That is, you find out what's being taught where, so you don't teach the same thing 10 times over. And you can do these through planning wheels. You have also different designs of integrating your curriculum into your school system, to where you just don't teach English alone or math alone. You could do it through multidisciplinary designs, teaching your curriculum, or interdisciplinary, or just even integrated days where you center on just one thing. And those are especially big in the elementary and the middle school. But curriculum integration has been a focus in changing the way we do things and teach things in the school. Character education has become, and always has been, really an important part of education, but now we're seeing from the business perspective and from family perspectives to emphasize those core ethical values that nobody really argues against. So things like honesty and fairness, respect, responsibility, and caring, that those are taught in a curriculum K through 12. And we've seen also to help in the violence in our schools, conflict resolution models, curriculums that help kids solve their own problems, to heal relationships, or try to reach a peaceful solution in conflicts. We've seen sexual harassment and bullying curriculums, the last 10 years especially, coming into play into our public schools, training not only teachers but then for kids in handling sexual harassment and curriculum. The DARE program has been around for a number of decades, which was targeting especially elementary kids, being taught by a regular law enforcement officer about drugs, and it's again had some mixed results when it comes to the final research of whether or not it's been successful. You've had in curriculum school-wide reforms that revolve around, like Success for All, about reading. You've had Accelerated Reader and a host of other reading type of programs, and I could go on and list a bunch, but as we saw in the Common Core curriculum, where your focus was on reading, that you had a number of programs kind of develop and increase their amount of time being taught in the elementary and secondary schools. So all of these were types of different programs: emergent literacy projects, a balanced literacy, reading recovery, all kinds of different types of programs that each had their research backing to help our kids read better. STEM, of course, now has, over the last decade, has become a focus where we've looked at, and STEM basically stands for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, combination of those four disciplines, and they're kind of grouped together to develop science and technology curriculums for kids, and they blend this into the learning environment, and we sometimes will have standalone classes that teach the STEM, or it could be conceptualized through the curriculum. But STEM is a major focus now to develop our engineers and our kids that can handle mathematics and technology and science much better than we have before. Technology curriculums, as technology has brought changes in our everyday life, so too have they brought it into the American school. And here we have in school systems now kind of a scope and sequence of curriculum that emphasizes technology usage. In Pittsburgh, we have two major corporations, Pisco and Synergistics, that are multi-million-dollar businesses that do all over the nation bring curriculums into public schools, both mainly in the middle school and secondary. So what of those types of curriculums might you think are leading the change in the American school? Well, now let's also look at the practices. What practices maybe hold the most promise? You saw in the 90s the development of the effective schools movement. It's continued through the 2000s, and it's kind of been implemented in a number of ways, and we don't hear it called effective schools much anymore, but we see the correlates embedded in a lot of things state departments do. And then also another movement, big in the way we've structured and practice things in our schools, is OBE orientations, where schools define what they're going to teach. They then assess it, and it's in those three cognitive areas of what skills, attitudes, and knowledge they wanted their students to leave with. And in a true OBE school, then once they do that mission statement that defines it, they have teachers develop a scope and sequence of curriculum where what you have what's taught from kindergarten to 12th grade, and then every lesson plan really reflects back upon teaching to those things they wanted their kids to be like and was stated in their mission statement and next outcome. So OBE, big movement. The Common Core has been a big topic of discussion for education, departments of education and school districts and even teachers. We've had a lot of schools develop them, and then one or two drop out. But the Common Core is basically asking schools to have a set of educational standards, K through 12 in English and mathematics. It's not in all the other areas, it's just those two areas right now. It's what we call the Common Core. Again, we'll be talking quite a lot about the Common Core later on in class. Mastery learning is a big one that has come in. If you really do believe that all kids are going to learn the intended curriculum and learn it well, then it's a practice of reteaching and retesting material when students don't learn it or master it the first time. We kind of don't go on till the kid can do what the exit outcome wanted him to be able to do. Mastery teaching has become throughout the states a model that is sometimes used to evaluate teachers. And Madeline Hunter, as she developed that, never wanted it to be an evaluation model, but it's an 8-step model, which I'm sure you've heard of, with ACET all the way through closure. But we're going to look at that again in current teaching practices, all 8 steps in much more detail. But mastery teaching was a big one. Learning style instruction and multiple intelligences both been a big play in how school students are taught. Rita Dunn and her husband had a big way of looking at all the elements that were environmental, emotional, psychologically, and sociologically. All the different factors, and they could do a student profile for each kid to see how they learn best, and then teachers would try to teach to those types of elements that fit to each kid. Howard Gardner with multiple intelligences that believed that every kid was gifted. We just don't know how, or we haven't valued exactly all those gifts. And he said that it's the school's job to teach to those different intelligences, and once you did, kids could learn a heck of a lot better. So multiple intelligence learning style practices have been big over the last couple of decades. Cooperative learning came about. The Johnson & Johnson models first started the movement where you had teams, games, and tournaments, the STAD model, Jigsaw. And then Kagan came in with a group of real short, energizing types of cooperative grouping to practice material. And we've seen a lot of staff development with the Kagan activity. But cooperative learning is a practice that has developed over time and taken different avenues to be implemented in our American school. We've seen tutoring programs, and many times peer-based. We've always had that kind of in college, but we're seeing it now in the high schools. We've had school-wide discipline plans always in place, but now with management centers so that it could be better addressed. Behavior could bring the kid back to where he could learn in a school setting. We've seen homework labs where kids could go and have their homework, get homework help. We've seen teachers use electronic field trips where instead of getting on a bus and going someplace, they can actually electronically, virtually visit a museum or historical place or an event like a cyber outing. And a lot of times students are connected then to the people doing the cyber outing, and they can ask questions and the like. So electronic field trips, way to go places without going someplace. And then, of course, practices and inclusion have taken different names as we've moved to separating kids out from the class to the least restricted environment. We're seeing different services come into play for kids, and so that has radically changed over the past 30 years. One of the changes we see now for helping every kid, they don't have to be identified, but the Kansas multi-tier system of support, a very systematic approach in providing a continuum of interventions to help all kids learn. And they look both at the academic and the behavioral needs. Good system in Kansas, but they ought to be proud of. In practices, we've seen some schools take a zero tolerance policy where they enforce policies with zero tolerance. It doesn't matter, which they believe help foster a safer school. We've seen ALICE training and crisis teams developed ALICE training really tied to training staff and students for an intruder or if a gun was in the school, what would happen. And then the crisis teams were developed in case, let's say, a teacher suicide occurred. They would a group of counselors would be coming to the school to help with the tragedy and the like. So a lot of interventions for developing safer schools in the past 10 years. And we're building schools a lot safer with safe rooms, with long walkways for a kid can enter a building with all the doors being locked. We've seen a move with art therapy to heal or to help in the healing process of kids that have gone through some trauma in their life. So one of the practices that you art teachers are familiar with. Individual computer centers were big last decade where every kid could have access to a laptop computer. But now we're seeing especially in the rural districts with grant money, one-on-one initiatives where every kid has either a laptop computer or an iPad that they can take home and use with everything turned in on devices like Canvas or Edmodo and the like. So these practices have, with technology, are radically changing the way teachers teach. When it comes to instruction, we're going to look a lot more in detail in current teaching practices, but we've seen technology change the way we teach. In fact, I've saved my chalk and eraser from my old chalkboard when I used to teach back in West Virginia, just so someday somebody asks what was that. But now we have smart boards. We teach by PowerPoints or Prezis. We can teach through podcasts, class wikis. We have networks for kids to share projects. Even an encyclopedia now, Wikipedia for information. Some there is some controversy there because it is written by the public and you might have some misinformation. Google Earth, instead of having a map in your room, you can do the Google Earth and even walk down the street of the place you're going to take them. It's just phenomenal. We do surveys through Survey Monkeys. You can take tests online on the smart board through different programs. You have vast ways to mind map or do graphic organizers on your smart board. You could have kids blog or journal writing right on their computer and have them post it for other kids to read. We've seen in instructional techniques, the big use. Marzano was big on the advanced organizers. Saw a movement towards teaching brain-based learning, much more scientifically oriented. It started out with left and right brain, but now it's developed into much more elaborate brain-based learning types of theories. We've seen collaborative instruction with kids and teachers, concept mapping, direct instruction, discovery learning, query learning, experimental learning, guided imagery. All of these are types of techniques that have come into play the last 20 years in our public school systems. We've also seen a move away from homogeneously grouping children to heterogeneously grouping, so you have role models for those lower achieving students. Extrinsic rewards for success. Not every child is motivated intrinsically, so we've seen more teachers provide different reward systems for their students. Power teaching is kind of cool, where it's a lot of chanting, a lot of movement, very active. We've seen multi-sensory instruction. The more you can have kids learn by doing and by touching, by sensing, by seeing, the longer they're going to retain it. Socratic questioning or instruction, the scaffolding. We have now allowed on the desktops the fiddles, which for ADHD children or even kids just under stress, they can reduce their stress by fiddling with them. Most now elementary schools will let kids have a water bottle on their desk. In fact, my wife always provided that water bottle at the beginning of the year, and they would keep it full and they could drink water whenever they wanted. And again, I moved to replace textbooks on readers or laptops instead of the paper types of things. So instructional techniques are always changing. We're going to see more of those. It's just a partial list of those things in current teaching practices. What educational change holds the most promise? So let's look at assessment too. How are we assessing kids? Well, state assessments are changing, but each state now has their own testing system, but those are undergoing some changes in each of the states. There's norm reference testing, always has been, but the move now is more to criteria-based reference testing, so it tells the teacher exactly what the kid doesn't know, so that could be retaught, rather than how in norm reference how they compare or stack out to the other kids that took the test. We've seen move to formative assessment over summative assessment, that kids are always in a process of learning, always in a process of becoming, and moving towards that criteria-based reference testing that tests what you taught and you taught what was tested. We have some schools that are experimenting with non-graded narratives. Instead of a letter grade A, B, C, D, or F, you're giving them how the kid did, and in a narrative what they know, can do, and believe. It's playing a little bit of havoc with admission to higher ed, but they're getting that worked out in different schools, for different schools. We've seen alternative assessments where you move away from paper and pencil tests in your classroom to authentic assessments, to where a kid has to produce something, and then that is collected in a portfolio that represents the best work of that kid for that year or that class. And we do that. We've always done it in art and music, but now we're seeing it done in mathematics and all of our other disciplines. Rubrics have become much more used to where you tell the kids what they're going to be assessed on, and they're based on performance criteria or standards, and so the kid knows what he has to do to be successful. So rubrics have been a good part, especially in the authentic assessments, evaluation. Peer assessment, having kids give feedback to other kids, and coaching upperclassmen with an underclassman, kept kids in school longer. Senior projects, and we've had several schools around this area to graduate. You have to do a senior project and pass by presenting it to a board. It's a research paper, it's also a project, and the presentation. All three of those are combined to show that to the community, and the community is invited on the day they present, that they can read, write, and speak, and do something good for the community. So senior projects, interesting way to show the public that our kids are learning. Nationally board certification came about mid-90s, and it was a way to have national certification, so you wouldn't have to worry about certification between the states, but it's also a way to show that the teacher was a master teacher. And it started real strong, but it's kind of died out now. But they have started looking at, they did look at assessing teachers by national board standards. We've seen alternative certification programs assessing whether or not a teacher can be a good teacher through alternative programs. Usually, if you have a degree in a specific discipline with a good grade point average, you enter into a master's program, and you learn as you go. And within 2 years, you get certified in the program that you're teaching at. So you learn as you go. So alternative certification, big in all 50 states. So what educational change to you holds the most value and the most promise for the American school? Give it some thought, because that's your question. Thanks for listening.